Friends, welcome to another edition of Fauji Days. In the backdrop of the 7th Military Literature Festival being held here in Chandigarh, we are honored to have with us a very special guest, Lt Gen Prakash Menon. General Menon is an infantryman from the Guards Regiment and has extensive counter-insurgency experience in Kashmir, having commanded both a brigade and a counter-insurgency force. He has been the Commandant of the National Defence College in New Delhi, and after his retirement in 2011, he continued in government as the military advisor and secretary to the Government of India, and from 2015 as OSD in the National Security Council Secretariat, the NSCS. He is a subject expert on the subject of nuclear deterrence, having got his PhD from the Madras University for his thesis, Limited War and Nuclear Deterrence in the Indo-Pak Context. In 2018, he authored his book, The Strategy Trap, India and Pakistan Under the Nuclear Shadow, and last year he co-edited another book called The Sheathed Sword, which is on the global non-first use of nuclear weapons, the GNFU. He continues to teach and research and is currently the Director of Strategic Studies at Takshashila. He is Professor Emeritus at TDU Bangalore and Adjunct Professor at the NIAS Bangalore. General Menon has been decorated with 3 Distinguished Service Awards, the PVSM, AVSM and the VSM. Welcome to Fauji Days, sir.
Thank you, Pankaj.
Sir, I have just been reading your fascinating book called The Strategy Trap, India and Pakistan Under the Nuclear Shadow. And although this was written in 2018, a lot of things have evolved since then. It's been almost 5 years. And I would like you to shed some light on how things have changed. I would also like to quote you liberally from this book while I'm talking to you. In 98, when you were at the Defence Services Staff College, you had mentioned that your views on the subject of nuclear deterrence and its impact on military operation and our military, you were in a minority of one. Would you say that that situation has changed today, or do you still feel that you are a minority in your views?
The issue was that what is the effect of India going nuclear on the application of conventional military power? That was the heart of the issue.
Right.
And I was of the opinion that, but that opinion was not yet backed by sufficient knowledge or research. But I felt that it would transform the way we applied conventional military power. Whereas at that meeting particularly, there was a very senior Lieutenant General, the President, the Commandant and all the directing staff, and they all felt that it is not going to make much of a difference as far as application of conventional power. So I deferred from them.
Right.
And that set me off really on provoked my curiosity, and I started to search for an answer to that question. And that book which you hold in the hand is actually a product and an answer to that question.
Right.
And I still believe that the theory which I have propounded, and the theory is that now that we are a nuclear power, and if we are applying military force against another nuclear power, there is a shrinking of political objectives which takes place, that you cannot apply force to the extent that you want to, because of the danger of escalation.
True.
And that probably has held in our case, because if you see, especially with our confrontation with Pakistan, we have stopped much short of ever even placing nuclear weapons on alert. But the fact is that the nuclear shadow over these events can never be wished away. So it's a psychological effect on the political leaders about how military power can be used, and because of that restriction, what you can achieve with conventional force is obviously restricted. What has changed? I think there has definitely been a change. I think from that time to now, there is acceptance that even at that time, people like General Raghavan had written about it, who was the former DG MO. And then he was, in the context of Pakistan, he said we should now go in for shallow thrusts, which means that you only take territory which is shallow in nature,
right,
doesn't trigger. And on the other side, the Pakistanis have always been telling us the moment you cross and something happens, then we can use nuclear weapons. That's the threat they have been wielding. In essence, those nuclear threats, frankly, are between nuclear powers are really incredible, because if you have nuclear weapons, and even if you use them anywhere, you can always be hit by a much larger force, and how you hit is actually what it is all about. So Indian military has changed in its thinking, but I do not see what needs to be changed has happened, which is the fact that we have three strike corps against Pakistan,
Yes, sir.
and which actually was created so that we have decisive battles against the Pakistani
That is
armed
one of the
forces
questions I have.
itself.
I'll come
So
to
that has not changed, and even with China, for that matter, whatever you might wish, both nations will have to consider that we have nuclear powers. The problem is that the moment nuclear weapons come on alert, and if it's alerted, then it's anybody's guess as to what is going to trigger off. And so, organizationally, we have not changed, and thinking which still remains, because it's very difficult to change what you've been doing before, and that's one of the problems of the military.
Correct, sir. Correct, sir. There's an inertia that does not get overcome very easily. So, sir, you say that when two nuclear powers have nuclear weapons, they directly impact the minds of policymakers and the politicians, and the impact is much larger. And you have said that the real use of nuclear weapons actually lies in their non-use. Most countries with nuclear weapons have kept them as deterrent against the opponent's nuclear weapons. But in Pakistan's case, there is a difference. Pakistan uses the nuclear threat against conventional war from India. Pakistan is giving rise to militancy and the grey zone warfare in Kashmir. And when we wish to counter that, Pakistan flashes the nuclear card, which skews the whole field for us in terms of strategy. So how have we dealt with it? How have we dealt with this difference?
Yeah, actually, let me just, historically, even during the Cold War, it was the weaker conventional power was the US, and the Warsaw Pact was actually stronger in conventional terms. And therefore, the Americans resorted to this nuclear threat by saying that we are going to use nuclear weapons in case you cross certain things.
Correct, sir.
Pakistan, being actually weaker to us in conventional power, does the same thing. Russia has done the same thing, where now weaker with the Ukraine and the NATO. They have actually they are wielding the threat. So the weaker power is the one which wields the threat. And the point is that when we look at the fact that conventional power has got its use, it doesn't gone away. The question is, how can it be used? So we find that between nuclear powers, warfare and war, the application of force has been, you can say, put to a much lower level, which is actually it's pushed warfare down to levels which now today does not actually means application of force, which we understood as saying force has now taken many forms.
Yes, sir.
The forms of coercion has changed, but eventually all forms of coercion, whether you're using it with nuclear weapons or with conventional weapons or any other, it is about affecting the minds of the decision makers and the populace on the other side. That is the strategic effect which you want to achieve.
Correct.
Nuclear weapons had one particular or two, that the scale of destruction and the speed of destruction was such that thinking of getting even hit by one nuclear weapon was enough to induce caution.
Yes, sir.
And that has not changed at all, although we see that there is a lot of talk about tactical nuclear weapons of lower yield, but that does not change the way that what will happen after the first nuclear weapon is fired.
Right. So in Pakistan's case particularly, are our options even further limited because of the threat, first use threat, and
Actually, I think when we look at this question, we need to understand what should be our political objectives if we go to war with Pakistan.
Right.
If we think that we are going to war so that Pakistan stops using terrorism as a political tool against us, I'm afraid that that cannot be resolved by the use of force, because terrorism is a instrument of the weak against the strong.
Yes, sir.
So the weaker you make it after a war, it will probably have to resort to terrorism than any other type of force. So this idea that we could actually go to war, get them to draw back on terrorism itself is questionable.
You
yes,
question it at length.
But therefore, what do we do is what the issue was, or the question you're asking. What do we do is actually Pakistan must be rest assured that whenever there is a terrorist act, we will react and we keep that option open to us. The damage which we cause, we will decide. But it's not about going to war as much as it's about punishing him for a particular act itself, which is what we have been doing.
Which is what you mentioned, the Uri surgical strikes in your book, and Balakot happened after that when we went to.
So it is not about the military deciding what to do. It's about the political decision makers, leadership deciding what can be achieved by military force. That is, they have to understand that you can't. When we had the parliament attack, Vajpayee is supposed to have told the then chief, General Padmanabhan, kuch karo.
Right.
He mobilized the entire army and entire armed forces, and where we actually went with it. Well, we achieved some temporary peace and some sort of a talks, but that is a political achievement. Okay, you can take it, but we know that that is not the way we should react with Pakistan. And we learned that lesson. And probably if you look at the way we have reacted thereafter, we have been much more calculated, because we know these problems cannot be solved by force or military force itself
alone. You're right, absolutely right. After Kargil, sir, India espoused its faith in limited wars. And you have quoted Minister George Fernandes on record, you quoted General Malik on record to say that this will be the future shape of warfare. Yet you disagree with it. You are not in agreement with what they said. Now we are approaching 25 years after Kargil was there. So what do you think has changed, or what is now the course of action for us as far as limited wars is concerned?
You see, I am not in total disagreement with the concept of limited war. But the fact is, how do you know that a war can be limited unilaterally?
Correct, sir.
Because it is at least a bilateral situation.
Yeah.
So a reaction scenario is inevitable.
You can't know your enemy's mind.
You don't control his will.
Yes, sir.
And one of the things about limited war is you can't impose your will, which is what you actually have to affect his will, and that is what the American concept about limited war was. That still holds good conceptually. So I don't think that the fact that Kargil war, the lesson we should take is that we cannot impose our will, we can affect it. And that would still depend upon how he receives and what is the threat and what are the interests involved. Because this cannot be spoken purely in terms of an action-reaction. It's also derived, it's always derived from what is the political objectives. If you look at all the things which have taken after the Balakot strike or any other, even the Uri, both sides were very cautious. Political rhetoric aside, they know that this can get out of control. And I think although Pakistan would always paints the Indo-Pak situation as the most unstable place in the world, if you really look at the history of it, we have shown, both nations have shown great maturity in trying to actually bring things under control as quickly as possible, as long as you don't have the large political objectives which require greater use of force. So we are actually an example from which others should actually learn.
Correct.
But that does not mean that there is some defined way of knowing how much force is sufficient.
Enough.
That is what the challenge to generalship is, or challenge to admirals. And
I remember after Balakot, there was a lot of speculation whether the PF will strike back the next day, and we were prepared for all kinds of contingencies.
Yes,
and it really can't be. You can't be sure.
I think there is a clause which actually explains this with the concept of the Trinity, and Trinity is actually, if you can imagine, a triangular base with three issues. One is hatred and anger or against hostility between the two countries or the populace and the government. The other one is political rationale, and the other part of the triangle is what we call friction, chance, and uncertainty.
Right.
So these three forces act on escalation. If escalation can be imagined as a magnet suspended in between the three forces, depending upon the situation, sometimes anger and hostility can actually pull it to the escalation level.
Fast.
Sometimes accidents, uncertainty. Things happen. Military forces, when they are engaged, they possibly can, a lot of funny things can happen which only military leaders will probably be aware of during the experiences. Something which is unimaginable happens, and that could actually set off or probably either escalate or make it de-escalate. But what are the larger force, which is political rationale? The political leader tries to keep control to make sure things goes out of hand. And I think nobody has explained this better than Clausewitz.
Clausewitz, still very relevant today.
Yes, of course.
Very relevant. You also said, sir, that the core of deterrence rests on the rationality of the opponent. If the opponent is rational, then deterrence works. If he's irrational, it won't work. And you've gone on to explain that, what deters Pakistan today may not deter China, or what deters Pakistan today may not even deter Pakistan tomorrow. So in this India, China, Pakistan triangle trio, is there any new thought on deterrence other than having a nuclear stance which we have?
Deterrence will have to be connected to the fact of what is the political objectives which are to be achieved by the person who is actually breaking the deterrence which exists. What are the interests involved? And that would actually decide how much of risk that country is willing to take.
Right.
So deterrence is not, it's not a word which always, it's like, I'm sure you're a parent, and when you have small kids, you can actually try to deter them by threatening them, but most of the time you actually fail.
Doesn't work beyond.
So deterrence is not something which is will hold at all time, but it is a way of describing that how does the balance of power itself keeps the other side from not attempting to do and having the notion of will succeed. That is what it is, but it's still very brittle. And once the thing is that you might start something at the lower level, but it might go to a higher level, and that can always break down. But in the end, it is psychological in nature. It is a mind game. It is between two, and what the other person thinks. And don't forget that what other person thinks about you may not be what that person thinks about others. So, and in the world of the information age, you can have both the reality and falsehood actually playing games on your mind, rumors flying, a whole lot of things happening which possibly you are not in control, and the speed at which this information spreads, that itself will make. So decision makers, we think that the revolution in military affairs is about knowing everything. We know that in reality it is a different ball game. That the political leaders actually have to live in what is called the fog of war, and that itself is underpinned by the fact that when you're a leader of a nuclear power, the very fact that you and your nation's survival is at stake would put you in a different psychological mind. So to think that they are normal, rational people who will take decisions very calmly, and I must also remind you that if ever nuclear weapons are on alert, then the leadership who are controlling those weapons would probably be either deep underground in some place or an aircraft.
Yeah.
And if you think that they could get information which provides them clarity, I don't think we live in the real world. So this rationality which we talks about is good in theory. It's good for academics to explain to us. For the practitioners, it's a different ball game.
It's a different ball game, sir. So you said that for India to try to project its military power across the Himalayas is fallacious because it does not take into account our logistical vulnerabilities, and the idea of mountain strike corps has to be rethought. I had on this very fora General N.S. Brad also, and he told me in plain words that a mountain strike corps is an oxymoron, because it is not possible to strike across the mountains with force given the logistics involved. So given that, how do we maintain a defensive posture? Would we always be maintaining only a defensive posture against China? Which brings me to another thought that I read about, that Kunal Verma, in his article on in Outlook about a few years back, had mentioned that if we target G219, the highway that runs parallel to our line of control, and we make that as the main deterrent against China, if all our guns was to be focused in a way that we take the highway out if on the first opportunity when China threatens us or does something, that would be a major deterrent. What would you say about these kind of thoughts, and how do we deter China?
Right. So the issue is like this, that when we talk about a defensive posture, we must understand that fundamentally all defense has an element of offensive in it. You can't just, when we must not mix up the posture with actually about the doctrine which underpins the posture itself. No defense can be purely just defensive.
Right.
The defense itself has to have an offensive element,
right,
which can eliminate threats which can come. Without that offensive element, it is no use just having a defensive posture. So going back to the Mountain Strike Corps, I had actually two objections to it, and I agree with what Brar said. We don't have the capability, and if we want to do that, we need to have 3 Mountain Strike Corps. But there is no way that we have had, because this is a 2,000 plus or maybe 3,000 kilometer border. You can't have 1 Mountain Strike Corps, and we don't have the infrastructure.
It's not even one; it's just about half right now. I think.
So my problem was also that. So operationally, it was a no-go. The other problem was that they were adding the size of a navy to the army. Okay, and what I had suggested was that unless the defense budget is going to be boosted, which I don't think is a practical idea, I said we need to rebalance from the west to the north, which is actually a process which has started off under General Naramane. But how much of rebalancing has taken place, I am not aware. But that's what we should do, because we have assets against Pakistan, which frankly are not usable. And in the world of deterrence, there is no doubt about it that if deterrence fails, you must be able to not only defend, you must be able to strike bad. But that's a balance. So in the mountains, it is better to have brigade-size unit which you can move even by air, and actually they should be put under the corps commanders. There, they would be the ones who exert it, because we have to connect this to why is this border active. China is not going to come across the Himalayas and capture Indian territory because
they would have the same logistics involved.
Yes, of course, they would have the same problem, and we would actually be at an advantage. They're not going to do that. We have to understand what are they doing. They're probably using northern border as a pressure point to nibble here, to bite here, and suck up our resources and our energy, so that our growth as a maritime power and as a country, we get boxed into the subcontinent. That's what the China is doing. Every strategist has to play to make sure that your strategy must actually counter the strategy of the other person. It is not blindly saying Mountain Strike Corps and deterrence will prevail is an idea which I completely disagree with.
Right. And the truth of the matter is, China is the only superpower which has not fought a war in 40 years.
That's another part, of course.
America is belligerent. Russia is a prime example today, but China is the only one which threatens but has never actually gone to war with a
They have this 2-year recruits who constantly move through the organization. So you know how this thing they could be at the lower levels.
So another strategic requirement that you define for warfare is the role of international cooperation and support. And we've seen a first-hand example both in Russia, Ukraine, where NATO has immediately stepped in and it is controlling a lot of parameters of the war. And on the Israel side again, Israel, Hamas, you see US stepping in immediately with 2 aircraft carriers in the region. And even a small country like Qatar playing an outsized role in terms of, getting negotiations done and, supporting both sides in a way to get the matter resolved. So how do you see our current international policy? Are we on the right track, and are we doing the right things there?
I think so, although we can never be perfect. With the very fact that our posture on the Ukraine war, because if you look at the history of the Ukraine war, both sides have a story to tell. Of course, we should have condemned the invasion of
Invasion
Ukraine,
per se.
which we did not. I
Yes.
think we should have.
Yes, sir.
Although we should have supported the fact that it's not just Russia to blame. These people also have actually just a story to tell. But we didn't do that. I think that was a wrong foreign policy step. We could have and still achieved what we have been able to achieve after that. And our posture, I think, even in the apart from the initial statement of the Prime Minister, where he supported Israel, and that obviously at that point in time, the Hamas attack had to be condemned. But the larger impression, which has now gained ground, is that India has now moved its support from PLO to Israel. But if you look at the latest, I think a couple of days ago, the United Nations resolution, we've actually supported Palestine in that revolution. Of course, one constant about Indian foreign policy is we have always supported the two-state solution of having Israel and Palestine together. So I think we are doing pretty well in terms of foreign policy postures which we have adopted. We can probably now play a much larger role because we are not an involved party in either of these wars.
No, but with all the realignments happening in the sense that China is supporting Russia in Ukraine, Iran is also involved over there. China is now supporting Pakistan as US has withdrawn relatively out of that area. India is now closer to the US. So there's so much going on here that, one wonders that...
Yes, you're right in the sense that there's so much going on. The point is, will India's voice as a stable peacemaker, will our Prime Minister be able to pull it off by having the confidence of both the sides? That's the larger question. Are we trying enough for that? Because probably there is an opportunity there for India. Have we tried enough? Because as you said, everybody else seems to be committed one way or the other. Can India play a role? At least I think we should try.
We are vying to be called the leader of the global south.
Well, actually, China it will give us a lot of competition there, and they have more clout in terms of the global south. What it needs is actually money,
right,
which we don't have,
right,
at the scale which they have.
So you wrote in 2018 in the book that the absence of a CDS, a Chief of Defense Staff, for a nuclear power like India is absolutely atrocious. It's unforgivable. Now we do have a CDS. But the question is our CDS fully empowered the way he should have been, the way you envisaged, or is he still hamstrung? With all the start-stop momentum happening on the theatre commands, which are one day, just about to be set up, and the next day you hear that no, they've been postponed till the elections are going to happen. Are we too slow to react to restructuring our armed forces, which is the need of the day?
I think it's long overdue. I mean, there is no reason why we should not move to theatre commands. I mean, that is not in question. In fact, the political mandate for the CDS was just this. It is not about I don't think the armed forces are given a choice to decide whether there's a theatre command should be or not. That point is past. Because as you know, the Indian Air Force were the main objectors to this,
yes, sir,
to the shift. So that point is past. The question was, even after the political mandate, we don't seem to be able to get it done. And there are many probably reasons for it. I think that's why at one point I had written, it looks to me that probably the only way to resolve this issue is probably we need a defense minister with a military background to make this probably transition, because otherwise, left to the services, they seem to be where they were always, in disagreement. Whether the CDS has the clout to actually overrule the chiefs, and whether it can be done with the reluctance of the chief and then succeed, I think that's a larger question we have. So in my view, this now requires political intervention, and they need to actually tell the chiefs.
And why is that not happening?
I'm not quite sure. Why is that happening? Because you're right. I mean, elections is now going to put the rest of the things in the background, and it's not. And at least they should have by now come out with the structural aspects of the theatre command system. Once you have that structural aspects in mind, the transition is a bigger and a more difficult war game. They haven't even had, because that's the first CCS note. We'll have to talk about the structural changes. And that structural changes would have to have theatre commanders probably as 4 or 5 stars. They would report directly to the Chairman Joint Chief of Staff. So, and my other point I think is the CDS cannot be all these things which he has been made out to be. Probably in the conceptual or the fact that while we are thinking about it, maybe yes, but he cannot be CDS as a military advisor to the defense minister. He cannot be the head of Department of Strategic Affairs. He cannot be permanent chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff's committee, and he cannot be in the nuclear vertical as the one who advises the nuclear command authority. It's impossible. We must understand that all these structures which you have is supposed to function in war. It is not about functioning in peace.
Right.
There is no way that a CDS can do all these functions in war. And I think that's a major lacuna that has to be resolved sooner than later. Eventually, it just comes out to actually getting government approval for a little more posts, but that's no big deal.
Another major shift that you advocate in the mindset of our military is you say that we privilege capture of territory over destruction, but that's wrong. Because at the end of the day, the capturing of the territory does not achieve much for us. And whereas if we use destructive power to destroy the enemy's capabilities or capacities, that is more useful for India. So has your suggestion found favor with the military establishment?
Well, let me tell you firstly, this suggestion of mine is about Pakistan, in the context of Pakistan.
In the context specific to Pakistan,
right.
Yes.
Now,
and you also talk about the degradation of the 3 strikers, which you were talking about earlier.
So in the case of Pakistan, if we think that we can capture territory and make them stop using terrorism as a tool, they'll probably agree to use it and then start using it after some time.
As has happened again and again. We've seen it with Hajipir, we've seen it with other territories.
So what we should be able to do is to, when they do a terrorist act, we should be able to strike without posturing. That's the first thing we should be able to do. We have that capability, and for that, actually, air power probably is the most suitable. Missiles have the problem of escalation. Air power can escalate and de-escalate very quickly. That's what we have actually done if you look at the reply of the Pakistan strike. So the idea that, go back to my earlier point, the idea that the terrorist tool can be stopped by use of conventional force under the overhang of nuclear weapons is actually problematic.
Right. So you talk about the revolution in strategic affairs, which essentially means that a massive change which changes the entire paradigm of how wars will be fought. So the nuclear revolution was probably the first. And then you talk about the second revolution in strategic affairs, which is about lethality, where even a small group of terrorists or a small grey zone warfare unit can be equipped with enough technology which is lethal to cause destruction on a massive damage. I think 9/11 is probably the biggest example where they could strike the Pentagon, which no military in the world could have ever imagined that, you would be able to hit the Pentagon, but they did it sitting on US soil with very little at their disposal. But now there is a third revolution in strategic affairs happening, and that is the rise of AI, artificial intelligence, where we are now talking about lethal autonomous weapons who will be, making their own decisions, where to strike, whom to strike. We are talking about drone swarms, which decide their own course. And we've seen some of it deployed in Ukraine. We've seen some of it deployed when the Saudi oil fields were hit by Houthi rebels. And now you're talking robot armies and whatnot. So how do you see India in the context of this third strategic revolution which is happening across the world, this race?
I think firstly, we need to differentiate between the tactical effect which so far has been achieved by these drones and robotic weapons. And unlike, we can't possibly compare them with what the nuclear weapons revolution has done. These are all very much in the much smaller scale.
So the major changes, can a weapon independently decide about the kill?
That's a different
ethical,
that's an ethical issue. So what I'm saying is, I do not think that it would be not only ethical, but it would be possible to have a robo with enough databases on which it actually acts, because all this is algorithmic.
Yes,
and you need to have developed databases. because the context and the moving parts of every battlefield is different.
Right.
So you can't train a robo on data for a Ukraine war and then do it for how the Hamas has actually done or how Israel is doing.
Right.
Because the data, there are too many moving parts on the battlefield. Identification is possible. You can identify a tank, you can this, but still, don't forget, as time goes by, the other guy on the other side is wily also. He can take countermeasures and fool because he knows this is what you are looking for. So this promise that robotic weapons are the way out and the fact that human agency can be taken, I think will follow the same trajectory as most technological developments. They promise much more than blindly what they actually deliver, because technology is contestable. It is not like a surgeon operating on a comatose patient. The other side has also got its say, and therefore where this is going to go. But I think we should take note of the recent resignation of Sam Altman.
Yes, sir.
From whatever it is.
In fact, that Q-Star project, because of which Sam Altman had to leave, is hinting at one major thing, that will AI just be a technology, or is it going to be something subsuming which will take over all technologies?
Yes.
And that is, of course, not answered today.
It is a question of whether it is better than human intelligence.
Human intelligence and even survival of the human race.
Yeah. So I would think that even that, the basic problem of the battlefield of having the robot to actually be fed with sufficient data to cater for all that is moving, and every battlefield is different, is not going to be solved by getting more data.
Right.
So I think there will always be, so human in the loop of that decision making would probably stay, and we are still a long way off from actually making it completely robotic. Although the speed of engagement, the ability to detect and so on is going to increase at a very fast pace. So it is not that it is not going to make a difference. It's going to make a lot of difference, but it's not going to happen that now the machines will take over and we don't require human agency for it. That, I think, is a mistake.
Still far, right, sir. So you mentioned in the book that Pakistan, till the time you wrote the book, Pakistan had not yet operationalized its nuclear weapons. What is the situation today as far as operationalizing of Pakistan's nuclear capability is concerned? And do they have the ability to launch from submarines?
Well, actually, Pakistan has come a long way too in their nuclear weapons. As far as launching from submarines are concerned, they don't have this nuclear submarines as yet. They have some nuclear weapons possibly based on their ships, and which is nowhere near actually comparing it with nuclear submarines. But in course of time, we should not be surprised, and I think they've already ordered submarines from China. When they come, the Pakistanis would probably try to fit their weapons onto these submarines. That's a possibility which exists, cannot be ruled out. It is a space which we should watch.
Right, sir. So you mentioned that the Indian military mindset is not fully aligned with our political objectives and our political aims. And you say that posing a higher military threat to Pakistan is actually counterproductive because it strengthens the Pakistan military on their home ground and leads to escalation and repetition of the same cycle. Whereas you advocate a drastic toning down of the military threat to Pakistan so that the moderate elements in Pakistan can come into position and they can then help us get the level of these skirmishes down and ration down the noise. So has the time for this idea come? Is the establishment?
No, I don't think so, because the point is, this idea is based on the fact that as long as the Pakistani military remains the predominant institution of that country, and the fact that their oxygen for their being popular is one of the reasons, is about the Indian threat. They are the only ones who can actually keep it. So when the Indian defense minister talks about that we are ready to take POK, then, which actually is questionable itself, not that we are ready or not. Why would you go and capture such large territory in a jihadi state? And it's India, especially when China is sitting on the border on the other side. So it's meant for the domestic audience, strong government. But the effect on the other side is different, and Pakistani army catches hold of it and runs with it. So it's counterproductive, and therefore we should actually behave and we should not actually flaunt our strength except in terms of deterrence, but not because we want to frighten the Pakistanis. Pakistanis are already doing to themselves and whatever destruction they brought. I don't think India should actually be the ones to say that we are going to take this and we're going to take that. And in doctrinal terms, I don't think India is a nation which tries to solve problems by launching invasions and so on. We are not in that category.
But we are not still ready to change our mindset yet on this.
No, I think whatever we see, we are not, because maybe the military is, but not certainly the politicians, because they use Pakistan for electoral purposes, and that we know.
So it's serving both the interests of both the establishments right now. Right, sir. So coming to my last question for the day, sir. You have said very categorically that in case Pakistan uses even a single tactical nuclear weapon on the battlefield, we should go for an all-out strike, and that an all-out nuclear strike would not only be politically correct, it would be the right operational objective also. And then you have said that even in case of a biological or a chemical weapon strike, we should be prepared to exercise a nuclear option. So do you still maintain that stance, sir?
Well, the first thing, let me tell you, I do not agree. I do not now agree with this issue of going for an all-out strike, even if it uses tactical nuclear weapons. India, as you know, does not believe in tactical nuclear weapons, because whatever be the size of a nuclear weapon, the weapon is about what effect it will have. The use of any nuclear weapon in confrontation, the first one, will have a strategic effect.
Yes, sir.
It's like, killing somebody with a pistol. It might be a tactical action, but the effect, is killing, let's say, a big leader with a pistol. It has a strategic effect. So we must not confuse between what they call. We don't believe in tactical nuclear weapons for ourselves. How should we react? And I think our doctrine has done a disservice to that particular reaction by actually changing what the NSAB, the first doctrine which was released in, I think that was in 2000 or 1999, where Mr. K. Subramaniam was the chairman, and it is released by Brijesh Mishra at this draft which was put out. That said that the reaction would be punitive and must cause unacceptable damage. When the CCS finally in 2003 came out with certain, they did not come out with the doctrine, but they said that they had a meeting on the doctrine and they put it out. They changed that punitive retaliation to massive. I think they should have retained what K. Subramaniam said, because the word massive retaliation doesn't make sense, and I'll tell you why. Even if India and Pakistan exchange about 100 nuclear weapons, the studies now show that there is a possibility that the world itself can be enveloped in what is called a nuclear winter, where the soot and the smoke and the fires, which will, because the nuclear explosions will cover the sun and agricultural system, biosphere across the world.
Everything will be affected.
Across the world can be affected. Even China would be affected. So doing a reaction like that is like committing suicide for the fear of death. So I think that massive retaliation is not the correct word to use, but we still have that flexibility because it says of causing unacceptable damage. Now we can decide what is unacceptable damage. There's flexibility in the language. The thing is that all doctrine is fundamentally based on ambiguity,
right?
That you cast a doubt in that person's mind. Right. And as far as the biological and chemical weapons is concerned, this was not actually referred to the threat about in the first draft of the NSAB. It is only in the CCS draft when they came out, they inserted this.
Right.
But it's got a very interesting wording for it, in which India reserves the option of reacting with nuclear weapons in case biological and chemical weapons are used against us. So we have the flexibility depending upon what sort of, because these can come in different forms and different sizes, and, and effect can be different. We therefore have retained. I think it's a very smartly worded sentence. So people cannot think that we don't have it in our doctrine, we know not. So that it's there. So that's how it is.
Right, sir. Thank you for so much interesting insights and on the thoughts that you've shared, sir. Our last segment is a rapid fire question segment, where you can either reply in one word or one line. and we can wrap it up after that, sir. So, the military leader or soldier you admire the most?
I must tell you that when I joined the NDA, I was a naval cadet, and I changed my service to the army because I read Field Marshal Rommel's book.
Okay.
So I think Field Marshal Rommel still remains one of my greatest
Desert
military
Fox.
leaders. Yeah.
Okay. The military school, course, or institution which you think best ingrains our military culture?
The Staff College in Wellington.
So, bang on, because General Bali chose the same choice. The military that you admire the most apart from the Indian military?
I think it's the Japanese.
The Japanese military? Right, sir. Right. Any particular reason why you say that?
Yes, because the fact that even when they were under all these, they still had a very powerful military, which they have. And I think the organization, and I've been to some of their bases, is very impressive.
Right.
They don't flaunt it like the others, but I think they're very strong.
Interesting choice, sir. Your favorite personal weapon?
Oh, in those days it used to be the AK-47.
Right. Again, this is a majority view. Your favorite food?
Chinese.
Wow. Risky choice. Your fondest or most challenging tenure while in service?
I think command of my battalion.
Okay, sir. Which was this? Where was this?
It was actually in both Dehradun and in Central Kashmir.
Right, right. Which battalion was this?
This was 13 Guards.
13 Guards, right. Your favorite war movie?
Operation Overlord.
Okay, Operation Overlord, right, sir. Your favorite military writer or book?
Colin Gray.
Okay, okay. Your favorite sport?
Cricket.
Cricket, of course. And what is the best thing about our armed forces?
I think it is about the spirit, the fighting spirit which we have when they are given a challenge. I think that is the greatest.
Right. That's a great note to wrap up on, sir. And thank you so much for taking the time out to come on to Fauji Days. And it's been an honor and a pleasure chatting with you, sir.
Thank you so much for the honor myself. Thank you.
Thank you.